Hi, welcome to the Audiophile. We're back again. This is Rick Schultz, and I'm Aaron Schultz, of course. Thought we'd talk today a little bit about reviews. So, the infamous review. First of all, just to kind of bring you up to speed, we've been talking a lot about the idea of having a review done and what makes a good review. What is a review in the first place, in a nutshell?
Well, it's a review. The process is you find someone who has a professional opinion of some type, and they typically have an interest in the product or the product area, and you'll submit a product over to them for them to take a listen to and give their feedback on, which is kind of the way that it's been done in the industry anyways.
Okay, so I know, and you know, we don't always go out to solicit a review as a manufacturer or a business. Sometimes we're approached by people who are interested and have varying levels of interest, and they will ask us to do a review, or they'll ask us for a product in order to do a review. Are there any restrictions? Do you place any restrictions on that? How does that process happen?
Well, I qualify with people when they ask to do a review, and not well enough. I've failed to do this in a couple of instances, which were probably disappointing in the end. And I guess I also during the conversation and qualification, what I'm trying to find out is, what level of interest does this reviewer have? Are they doing it because they have to? Maybe one of the higher ups have said, "Oh no, you got to do a review on this particular product," and the last thing they want to do is another review. So they start off, out of the gate going, "Oh no, I got to do a cable review." God, and so that's not where you want to be, right? You want to be with somebody that's enthusiastic about your product and truly wants to learn, and is going to share that learning process with the readers.
Okay, so that's a good question. Are there different kinds of reviews? Does a review actually have to be somebody who's qualified, say qualified in your industry in order to review something? Or can there also be on the other spectrum an interest, like part-time sort of listener or somebody like that who's just sharing their interpretation of things? Is there value in both of those, in your opinion?
Absolutely. I think that there's value in both of those. There's the more qualified reviewers simply would have more experience doing the job, I think. Just to pick that a particular person has a significant gift of being able to hear things and point those things out. There's so many people that have that gift to varying degrees. It would be impossible to say, well, who are the top reviewers out there? Mm-hmm. Because you can certainly say the most popular reviewers, but to say the top reviewers, you'd really have to go through, search their articles and look at the passion that they have and how they tend to communicate. Mm-hmm. A good reviewer has a positive attitude, is willing and wanting to learn about the product, engages with the manufacturer a lot so that they understand the product and can communicate what the manufacturer is trying to communicate to the customer through the review. When they're listening to the product, they're going to consult with the manufacturer. Am I doing this right? Is there something else to this process that I should be doing? A lot of those things aren't done in what we would be considered professional reviews, unfortunately.
So I guess there's two different things. We would maybe, as manufacturers or business owners, have a different kind of viewpoint on what makes a good review, and also have a different idea of what kind of input we might have.
Right.
And a consumer also might have a different. I don't know that as a consumer. Well, there's an ethical consumer, right? There's a responsible consumer. When I go to look for something, I do my due diligence to learn something about it, find out the people that are involved in it, know who the processing, if I'm doing really, my due diligence. So do I have access as a consumer to that information, truly?
Yes, you do. At least you should. The route that a consumer should take if they're trying to learn about products is to work as much with a manufacturer as they can, because nobody's going to have more knowledge about a product than the people that made it. And so let's say you get a review on a particular product and a manufacturer says something different. The manufacturer is probably going to be correct in what they say more than the reviewer, because the reviewer isn't as invested. They wouldn't have taken the time, years in fact, some products take to develop, and they may not have gone through the proper processes. As I went through this, I ended up learning so much. And one of the fundamentals that one of the engineers taught me that builds electronics was that tubes fundamentally create voltage, and transistors fundamentally create and operate on current. And the two of them don't actually really go together. And in fact, at one early point in the audio industry, you really couldn't mix tubes and solid state. And it was a decision on behalf of the Audio Engineering Society to compromise both so that they would be able to work together. So instead of having, just transistors doing the best of what transistors do and tubes doing the best of what tubes do, they made a compromise so that you could put a tube with a transistor if you wanted to. And although neither of them would ever work as well as they should have, they could now put them together. And that was decided based on what I was told, and again, this is hearsay, but because the industry would be able to grow with that. It would bring more people into the industry, more manufacturers, and more people that got a chance to choose a wider product range.
So in this day and age, given the political climate and everything, it kind of reminds me of a lot of this is really about reporting and ethical reporting when it comes down to representing appropriately and fairly manufacturers or businesses or products, things like that. And even when it comes down to inventors or developers, things like that, it's important as a consumer as well to be reading those that it needs looking for ethical markers, right?
Yeah.
That those people have been consulted, that they've been referenced,
Yeah, and those things can be skewed to the point where they kind of almost get to a point where they're industry-wide. In the last number of years, and it's been quite some time now, people have been having debate what's better, balanced or single-ended. And the real question about that was more so what kind of cable connection, because most gear is all single-ended. There's a little bit of balanced out there. There's a handful of manufacturers that truly make balanced circuitry, but there's almost everything has balanced connections or cables on it. Okay, and there's a big difference between balanced circuitry and balanced connections. And just because you buy a product that has balanced connections on it doesn't mean that it has balanced circuitry. It probably doesn't. Okay, so but yet when people have the debate, they can get very heated about this, and people will defend a particular product because it's got balanced, and say, well, this has got to be better because it's balanced, and not even realize that the circuitry itself is not balanced. So it's the problem is there's so much to learn.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of it that ends up just being opinion papers then too. We're human beings, but there's opinion out there, but there's also information, and you can glean a lot of information from finding the right sources.
Yeah, even ourselves, at one point in time I talked a lot about balanced connections versus unbalanced connections, and we didn't offer balanced cables at first for a period of time, and it was because I was trying to communicate to people that the electronics themselves weren't balanced, and I ended up offending quite a lot of people because they understood it differently, and in some cases I think some of them may have even had balanced electronics, but the wide majority, 95% of product or more, doesn't have actual balanced circuitry on it. It just has balanced circuitry in the connections, so that you can put an XLR cable on it. And the point, I think I pushed it too far, and in the end, is a balanced cable better than a single-ended cable? The answer to that question is, if you can use balanced, there is more voltage. And in our particular case, you can apply more magnets. So the result is, in most cases, a balanced ends up sounding better. But does that mean that balanced is just overall a better way to go? And the answer to that is no. It really isn't. It's louder, and that's one of the things that kind of leads people astray, is because you've got that extra gain available with balance. But let's get back to reviewing. When it comes to that, then one reviewer may review a product and run it single-ended, and another one may run it balanced. One may run into one different type of amplifier, and another run it into another different amplifier. You never know what the types of gear that are going to be associated with that product are. And what I found...
Well, I guess you should know, right? Because isn't that kind of the idea? There's a certain protocol along with qualifications, right? We can check on qualifications. We just had a little discussion about that. Who's qualified to do this? And two, there is a certain protocol. Like some of the reviews, and whilst I don't look at them often, they do list the gear that they've used. They do list or should list what kind of atmosphere, surroundings, what room they were in, what gear they were listening to, what components were. Usually that's listed, and I've seen ones that list time frames and those kinds of things. So there are certain, I don't know, what do you call them, protocols? Is that fair to say?
Loosely, I think is the answer to that question. I have not seen, and it may have happened, and it may have happened often, but it certainly would be the rarity, where a manufacturer would be, let's say, reviewing a preamp and purposely went and got amplifiers that were well mated to that preamp, just for the point of the review. They'll usually use whatever it is that they have in their rig, and then report on it that way. And what that tells you is not how that preamplifier performs. It's how that preamplifier performs in that very particular case, but not really much else. Unless you have exactly the same gear, cables, that sort of stuff, speakers, are you going to get the same sound? And the answer to that is no, not realistically. That's an unrealistic expectation for us to set. And therefore, in defense of anybody that's trying to do a review, what do you expect? Think about this, for example. There's over 3,000 cable manufacturers, I've heard, in the United States alone. And when you go through most wanted components lists of most magazines, you'll see a handful of manufacturers that have their names mentioned. Most of the products that are being manufactured and made aren't even known by the manufacturers, or by the reviewers. So they might be saying, well, this is the best power cable I've ever heard, but they haven't heard, worldwide, 99.9% of them. They've only heard 0.1 of 8% of all of the power cables that are made out there in the world. So to say it's the best is quite a figurative term. And unfortunately, we don't, catch ourselves with that. I think in the review industry, or as an audiophile industry, we're not careful enough to say, listen, it's impossible for us to know about every brand that's out there. And it's impossible for us to review and hear every product out there. In fact, it's impossible for a whole organization, even the big ones, to be exposed to all of the gear that's out there. They just know about a tiny fraction. So when you're reading a review, you're going to be reading a review more likely of somebody that has invested in that magazine with some advertising, because that's one of the ways that reviewers get to know about the product. They're looking through their own magazines and they come across this and go, oh wow, this brand is live. And they make these. That sounds kind of interesting. I think I'd like to review that. So
Advice on how do you filter that information out there? Where's the best place to choose and of what you read, and where do you go about finding information?
Good luck. I really don't have a good answer for that question. I do tend to when I go through audio shows, I'll take a listen to products that are out there, and I'll listen often for a sonic signature that I like, and if it's nice and airy and open and clear and it's fairly fatigue free, then that's the kind of stuff that I tend to gravitate towards. And so when I hear something like that, I communicate with people that are selling that product, and I might ask them for their opinion on products that they know of that are like that. But you'll have certain groups that have a selective quality of what they're listening for, and to get within inside a group like that has very similar attributes in their own systems and the stuff that they play to what you are listening for. Because there's no point if you're listening for, let's say the only thing that matters to you is having a really deep soundstage, a topic we covered before, and you go to work with a manufacturer that really is about fleshing out utter clarity, because the depth of soundstage is going to change and be presented differently than it would in a system that was focused just on soundstage separation and imaging, because there's more to it, right?
Sure. Okay, so sources of good helpful information. Manufacturer, go to the source, right? Get the information from a manufacturer. Sometimes there's representatives that are well versed as well that can be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there you're typically speaking to somebody that's really well educated. I recently acquired a DAC, and I called the manufacturer asking about the DAC. I was looking for something that had Sony high res, SACD, and this DAC that I got didn't have high res playback. So I talked with the people there and the engineer that I spoke to. He was brilliant. And by the time I was done speaking with him, I really had lost my concern over whether or not I could play back the high-res files. I just wanted to listen to the attributes of this product, and it was really, really good. I mean, it was super. I'm glad that I got what I got. I have other high-res players, but they still don't, even with high-res format files, they don't play nearly as well as this thing does with just regular CD files. So, yeah, you never know what you're going to get until you ask.
Well, thank you. Join us again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.